Look, every single year you tell yourself that this year will be different and you are magically going to get clients or hit 20K a month, but it won't happen. And in 2026, the whole cycle will repeat if you don't break the pattern now. But luckily, in this video, I will show you the exact 4 things you have to do now in order to make 2026 your year and hit your first 20K a month. So in order to make 2026 the 20K a month agency year, we first of all have to define what it means and what we have to do in order to make the year a good year. And in my opinion, it's doing the right things that actually move you forward using leverage while making the work feel effortless. Because if you achieve this, 2026 will feel effortless and you will achieve all your goals. And to achieve this goal, we have to break it down in 4 different things. First of all, goals, using leverage, dopamine, and the system approach. Okay, I will walk you through everything in order. And the first thing we have to do is we have to reverse engineer the goals that we have to make them achievable by numbers. Then we have to focus on leverage tasks which compound throughout the year. We have to keep your dopamine low throughout the day and release it in the evening. And we have to frame your offer as a system so you can charge higher prices and get clients more easily. These are the 4 things you have to implement now in order to achieve the goal and make 2026 your year. Okay, let's go through everything in detail, and we start with the goals. Because this is one of the most important things. Most people just tell themselves, hey, my goal is it to make 20K a month this year. And they won't achieve it. It's impossible to achieve since this is a result-based goal. They have no control over the output, and they cannot control if they're going to make 20K a month or not. So what we have to do is we have to break down the goal in such a way that you end up with having action steps which will logically lead to achieving the goal. Right? So what we do here is we start with the end goal in mind. For example, what is the end goal for 2026? Right? And this should be about a result that you are not in control of. For example, buying a Porsche or making 50K a month or traveling to any destination, whatever. Okay, so we start with the end goal in mind, and then we reverse engineer the numbers you need to hit to achieve the goal. Right? For example, if your goal is it to buy a Porsche and the Porsche costs 200K, then we need to break down how many clients do you need, how many sales calls do you need, and how many meetings do you need to book. Right? If, for example, every client pays you 5K a month, you need, for example, 20 clients with like 100K and so on. And then we just reverse engineer how many sales calls do you need to achieve 5 clients or 10 clients, and how many meetings do you need to book in order to get a certain amount of sales calls. And this is based on your numbers and the closing rate you have, the show-up rate, and the booking rate you have. But if you break it down, you will logically end with 10 or 50 meetings you need to book every single month to have a certain amount of people show up and to close a certain amount of people which pay you a certain amount of money so you achieve the end goal. Okay, so we break it down in really specific numbers using your current KPIs and numbers. And then we break it down even further until you are at the level of outreaches. So how much outreach do you need to do on a monthly or daily basis to get X meetings booked, which lead to X sales calls, X clients, and the revenue you want to make, right? And the lowest step that we have is what we call the logical step number 1, because this is the only thing that you have control over. Because you cannot control if you have X amount of sales calls or if you close X amount of clients. This is outside of your control. So the things you do that lead to the outcomes. Therefore, this is the only thing that we will focus on. On top of it, we also break down which actions you need to do to support the breakdown. Right? So for example, which actions do you need to do additionally in order to make sure that X amount of people show up or that you close X amount of clients from X amount of calls. For example, sales training in order to close X amount of people from X amount of meetings. Right? Inside the mentorship, we have a thing called the Grow Framework. It looks like this. And this is like the structure in how you should break it down. Right? So we start with the North Star in mind. Then we break down the goal on numbers. So how many clients you need, how many meetings, how many sales calls, and then how much outreach you need to do to enable this whole process here. Right? On the right side, we just break down which actions you have to perform to support the cycle. And if you then focus on the logical step number 1, you will achieve the goal at the top by logic, right? There's no way of not getting there. And now we already covered pillar 1. So you now have the goal that you have broken down into tiny steps. So you know exactly what you have to do and you actually have control over the goal and you have action steps and action goals you can actually achieve since you have control over them. So the next pillar we have to focus on is leverage. We need to enable leverage in every single area that we do in outreach, in our offer, and so on, in order to grow exponentially. Right? So the first thing that we want to do is throughout the year, we want to focus on our logical step number 1 plus the quality steps. Because if you focus on the outreaches and the quality steps, this will naturally lead to achieving the overarching goals here. So you achieve the end goal. Right? Then we want to test, track, adapt, and scale. So whatever we do, we want to test it first, track our numbers, adapt our outreach, our scripts, whatever we do based on this, and then we want to scale. So then we want to outsource, and we want to make sure that we can actually scale based on the numbers that we have. So you should ask yourself, how can I get my volume up by 10, 30, or 50x? By outsourcing it, or doing more, or using leverage of any kind. Because if you can get your volume, your input up by 30x, your output will also go up by 30x. Really important here, just focus on 1 leverage task per day. When I was starting out, I tried to focus on 6, 7, 8 tasks per day. And it's not worth the time. Because if you would just focus on one thing, if you would just focus on the outreach and do as much outreach as possible, you will get far better results than focusing on 6 tasks that don't even matter. Right? So again, use leverage in any area of your agency, also with the offer that you have. So also stack the retainers. So instead of charging a one-time fee or like a smaller maintenance fee, you should go for like a mid-sized or retainer that makes sense for your like offer. And then you should stack the retainers, because if you charge 2K a month, for example, per client, and in the first month you only get 1 client, and the next month you get 2 clients, you are already at 6K because you have the retainer from the first month and the 2 new retainers from the next month, right? And if you keep going, it will multiply and it will grow exponentially because you stack the retainers from the months before. Right. Additionally, I also recommend you to start creating content and a personal brand, because this will also compound throughout the year. And this is one of the biggest leverage tasks and things you can do. Right. So remember, whatever you do, just enable leverage and try to grow exponentially in every area by increasing the volume, increasing the inputs by 50, 100x. And this is how it will look then. If you just focus on normal tasks or you don't apply any kind of leverage, you will just have linear growth. Means you will just grow throughout the year in this linear curve. But if you use leverage things, so if you leverage the outreach, you get your volume up, you focus on leverage tasks, you stack retainers, and you start creating a personal brand or like a YouTube channel, then it will be exponential. Means it will compound throughout the year and you will get far better results than with focusing on the linear growth curve. The next pillar, and this is super important to make the work feel effortless, is the dopamine control. Right? Because the current problem that you most likely face is that your dopamine peaks throughout the day, leading to being unable to do the work when it drops. So even if you have the best goals, you know exactly what you have to do every single day, and you apply leverage to it, if you're not able to do the work, you won't get anywhere. Means we need to make sure that your dopamine is super low throughout the day, so you can focus on the work and you release it in the evening. Because this is how it looks for most people, right? When they start their day, they have like the spikes inside their dopamine. Means, for example, they wake up and then they look at their phone and scroll on social media, which leads to having like a high dopamine spike and having like much dopamine released. Right? Then it drops a bit, and then they watch, for example, an episode on Netflix or on YouTube, and the dopamine is high again. Right? Then they do the work and it drops again. And then they have lunch, they eat like a big lunch. So there's like another dopamine spike again, and then it goes down again. Right? And if you have like the spikes throughout the day, and especially if the spikes come from fake dopamine, so from external things like eating, being on social media, being on the phone or stuff like that, it will be really, really hard to do the work when you are down here. And this is the level where you will do the work, because the work won't give you this high dopamine spikes. Means you will be unable to do the work, and every time it drops, you feel really, really unmotivated and you're just not able to do the work. Right? So what we have to do is, we have to make it look like this, that throughout the day, we have a super, super low dopamine level by avoiding your phone, by avoiding social media, by avoiding big lunches, and just focus on getting real dopamine. So dopamine from the work, right? So there still will be small spikes, but this dopamine is real dopamine, since it comes from doing the work and feeling good, since you do the work. And then we can release the dopamine at the end of the day. So at 6, 7, 8 p.m. with the phone, with eating a big lunch, whatever. Because when you sleep, the dopamine resets again. And this will lead to being super motivated and making the work feel effortless, since there are like no spikes, right? You operate from a super, super low dopamine level. which makes the work feel effortless, and then you just release it in the evening. So if you compare this is how it should look like. And if you implement this, it will be super, super easy to do the work. So now you know exactly what your goals are. You know exactly how you can achieve them by numbers and by logic. You apply leverage to make sure you achieve the goals even faster and even smoother. And you also make the work feel effortless by applying the dopamine release and the dopamine control. The last thing we have to do is we have to make sure that you can actually charge high retainers for your offer, and you will be able to close clients. Because even if you have the best goals and you apply leverage, if your offer is shit, you won't get clients. So the last thing is what I call the system. So pillar 4 is framing your offer as a system, right? Because if you just offer services, you only compete on price and experience. So it's super hard to get clients, and you can only charge low prices. What we have to do is we have to solve a chain of problems, not only one problem. So instead of only running Facebook ads, for example, we have to think about which problems does appear after we solve the last problem. So we solve a chain of problems, which is worth a lot of money for your clients. Right? And after you have the chain of problems, we just frame the offer that you have as a system. Right? We sell it as a unique system and infrastructure, and we use the service, so the Facebook ads, the email marketing, whatever, only to fulfill on the promise, but we don't sell it. So this is how it looks then. We have one niche, we have a name for your system, we have a VPH, and we have a 3-step breakdown. Okay, so instead of saying we run Facebook ads for businesses, we should go for one specific niche, for example, landscaping. We have to give our system its own name, for example, the scaping engine. And then we have to make a super specific VPH out of it. For example, we help landscaping companies to get an extra 12 jobs per month worth 9K while removing them from the stress of word of mouth using our scaping engine. Right? And then we just break down everything in 3 simple steps, and we just tell them which problems, which chain of problems we solve with our system. For example, we run high converting campaigns to get you 10 to 15 leads per month. Our engine qualifies all leads, focusing on high paying jobs, and it sets all the appointments directly into your calendar. So if you compare this to the offer you had before, you now have your own system, you solve more problems in a row, so you are actually able to charge higher prices since you create much more value, and you are able to communicate the value in a much better and easier way, right? And this will lead to being able to charge high retainers, so between 1.5K and 5K a month, depending on the offer that you have. But this is the last thing that you need to implement to make 2026 to your best year, because now you have a really, really great offer where you create a lot of value and you can charge super high prices for every client, and it makes it easier to get clients. You can control your dopamine to make sure that doing the work feels effortless and you are able to do all the things you have to do to achieve the goal. You use leverage to compound and do more inputs to get more outputs, to also make it feel much more smoother and effortless. And you know exactly what your goal is and how you can achieve the goal by logic, since we broke it down in tiny steps. If you implement these 4 pillars, 2026 will be not the best year, it will be a year that you will never forget. Right? I hope you enjoyed the video, and I see you in the next one.